So I saw this map of the United States, and then they zoomed in on Illinois, and I could see Lake Michigan, I could see Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana, Michigan. I saw these states surrounding, the Chicago area. And south of Chicago, just below the tip of Lake Michigan and just west of the Indiana border, was the northern ends of 3 subterranean caverns that were absolutely huge. And I was seeing it at a perspective angle of about 30 degrees, the way the map was orientated. And so it looked like they were about a half a mile underground, maybe a third of a mile, I don't know. But if it was more than a half a mile, it would be awfully uncomfortable for human habitation because of the geothermal gradient. It gets hotter the ground you go. And I had to look that up. I didn't know that at the time. But there were 3 caverns. There were 2 parallel to each other, closer to the surface, and then one in the middle, underneath them, between them. And they were tapered at the ends, a little fatter in the middle. They almost looked like bananas. And they were sloped downward at their southern tips and southern ends. And at the southern end, I would say they were as far south as Peoria, Illinois. So as far north as, say, Joliet, and as far south as, say, Peoria, but not as far south as, like, Springfield. But still, these things are ginormous. They're just absolutely huge. And I'd say probably the amount of material that had to be removed to construct these things would rival the Panama Canal.
Welcome. I'm here again with Erik Nanstiel. Erik, pleasure to have you back.
Sean, it's good to be back. Thanks.
Okay. I think we ended your story with the stomach ailment that you'd had. Right, I think?
No, we didn't talk about that on camera.
Talk about that? All right. Do you want to talk about that one first, or?
If you want to. It's a little out of sequence, but yeah, we could talk about
why don't we go back? Why don't we stay in sequence, actually? What happened next, I think, is where I'll start.
We talked about the surgery. I'd like to talk about something that happened between my ex-girlfriend and me in 2022. She and I became pregnant. She was pregnant. And she decided that even though it was inconvenient for her life, she would have the child. And in her 9th or 10th week, she miscarried. And I don't know, I don't remember exactly when, but I think it was in April when she miscarried. She told me that when she inspected the tissues that she had passed, she could not find the fluid-filled sac with the fetus. Like all the other afterbirth stuff, all of that stuff, that supports a growing fetus, all that came out, but the fluid-filled sac and the fetus itself were not among the tissues passed. So she went.
And she would know that because she was a medical doctor, right?
Yeah, she's a doctor, so she knows how to identify stuff like this. So she went to her obstetrician to get a checkup, is there anything wrong? Is there anything still left inside the uterus? And the obstetrician confirmed there was nothing left inside her uterus. Now, this miscarriage happened during a time where I was being visited every 4 to 6 weeks. They were either taking me out of the house or they were doing semen collections in my room, but it was nonstop. It was just happening a lot. In fact, so often, I imagine, because she and I were sexually active at the time, that they might have been frustrated. They come for a semen collection, and I had already donated it to somebody else.
Tapped out, right?
Right. So what do? They stick a needle in my hip and they take marrow instead. They're coming for something. If they don't get the semen, they take marrow. So anyway, the fetus was missing from the pregnancy, and later on in the year, she said, if this baby had carried to term, he'd be born on or around your birthday in January. And I'm like, wow, wouldn't that be weird? And then January came around, she and I ended up breaking up, sadly. And then I was having my normal 4 to 6 week visits. But then come June of 2023, I woke up in a standing position. I was not in my house. I was in a round room, and it was a metallic floor. The round room was circumferenced by windows. They were narrow windows. They were very long, and they were all the way around the room. And I'd say the room had a 60-foot a diameter. So this was a pretty large room. And I thought I was in a air traffic control room. And then there was a tall man there.
To advertise on Through a Glass Darkly, email throughaglassdarkly@gmail.com.
I thought he was an air traffic controller. There was nobody else in the room except what I'm about to tell you. And there was, in the middle of the room, there was a metal table. And on top of the metal table was crawling a baby boy. And he was about 6 or 7 months old. And this was in June. And the tall man says to me, as words in my mind, he's yours, but he has a genetic problem, and you're here to provide the tissues we need to correct it. And I'm like, wow, okay. But I was just looking at this baby crawling around. He looked like a healthy baby. I could see he was a boy. I could see his genitals, but I couldn't see his face. His face was kind of turned away from me a little bit. If I saw his face, I don't remember that. But I wish I could remember his face. So I went unconscious shortly after he said those words to me, that you're here to provide tissues so we can correct it. And I woke up back in my room, back in bed, and then I sat up, and it occurred to me as I'm thinking about it, it's like, wow, I just saw a baby boy. I've always wanted a son. I always wanted a baby boy. I always wanted more children. I have one daughter, and I did not get to experience normal fatherhood because my daughter is very disabled, neurologically speaking. And I always wanted to have a boy. That would have been wonderful. But here was this boy crawling on this table. But then it occurred to me, he was like 6 or 7 months old. Like, whoa, holy shit. Like, if my ex-girlfriend, I'll call her Samantha, if my ex-girlfriend Samantha and I, if we'd carried to term, then he would have been born on or around my birthday. And that was 6 or 7 months ago. And this is, 6 months ago. And here we have a 6 or 7 month old boy. And I'm like, that's just too coincidental. And because I'd already put the boy out of my mind because the miscarriage happened nearly a year before, so it wasn't even in my mind. I wasn't thinking, oh, I'm sad I didn't get to have a child with my girlfriend. I was actually a little relieved, even though I'd always wanted children. I was 55 years old at the time. And that's not a good age to start having children because then you're lucky if you're still alive by the time they go to college. And I don't want to leave children behind, that are still young and still need me. It's not fair to them. So I wasn't thrilled about having a kid. I definitely would have had a child with her, but I was kind of relieved, with the miscarriage. But now here I am thinking, wow, because this child was mine, they went to my girlfriend's house, into her bed, and violated her to steal this baby. And I looked into it since I had this realization. I started researching this. Other abductees report missing pregnancies. This does happen. And I'm like, God damn these people. Fuck them. I try not to, it's like I never got to know the baby, but at least I got to see him. But God damn them. Even if he had a genetic problem, I would have taken him, But yeah, I was not permitted to know this child. So later on, I asked, because a year before they'd showed me a gallery of images. In 2022, they showed me a gallery of images on a wall. There were 3 rows of portraits. They just appeared. And they were 3-dimensional, almost like holographic, but they looked like the actual people were in the wall. Like the image was that good, but they kind of looked like holograms. And of varying ages, like almost from infancy all the way up to adulthood. And it was anywhere from 18 to 27 individuals. I didn't count them, but this was in, I want to say, August of 2022. I don't remember exactly, but I'm pretty sure I put it in the book accurately because I was very careful when I retraced and put things, I wrote it down, but off the top of my head, sometimes I forget. But this was August or September of 22. And so I saw these images on the wall, and I asked, there was two tall grays standing next to me, and I asked, do they have names? And the grays, they said, well, would you like to give them names? And I said, sure. So, but I wasn't taking it seriously. I was being rather flippant about the whole thing. And so I started pointing at them. All right, let's call this one Kirk, this one's Spock, this one's McCoy, this one's Sulu. And I was giving them Star Trek names. And I think they were amused by that. They knew that I was giving, like I was making some kind of popular culture reference. Not that they would know what Star Trek is, but, you know, since it was just so flippantly coming out of my head, it was, you know, not something I was making up, but something I was giving other people's names. And so I was very flippant about that. And I'm wondering what if they showed me the next year, they showed me the baby boy that they'd taken to see if I would react differently on an emotional level.
What did these children look like?
I don't remember their faces, and it's kicking me. The reason why I've spent over $1,100 going to hypnotherapists is because I'm trying to remember their faces. I had difficulty. The two times I went to hypnotherapists, I had difficulty. I couldn't achieve being hypnotized by these people.
Did you ever think that the reason you can remember what's going on in a lot of these cases is because for the same reason that you have difficulty being hypnotized? If you can break out of their hypnosis, then you can definitely break out of a human kind of thing.
They try to impose screen memories, something I call a post-hypnotic veil. That's just my term for it. But Freud called them screen memories. He had a German word for it, obviously. But I eventually, through the course of all my abductions with them, I stopped believing the screens. You know, it was like, where you're in a room with somebody, you think, like, I think I'm looking at my brother Ron, but then when I wake up later on, it's like, well, my visual memory was that I was looking at a small gray, not my brother Ron. You know, my brother Ron is 6'2". You know, it's like, not a small gray. But the screen memories stopped working on me. And maybe that's why they stopped letting me be awake during some of these encounters, because I just remember so much visually. I have a very strong visual processing. I'm an art director and graphic designer, so I see everything visually. I remember everything visually. I mean, not like eidetic, like a photographic memory, you know, not perfect, but it's difficult to fool my eyes when I'm looking at something, you know, and my visual cortex, it's like it won't be denied for some reason. Like I resist those screen memories. So yeah, but I don't remember those faces on the wall, and I wish I did. And I wish I'd taken it seriously. Not that, like, if I had full access to my faculties, I wouldn't have offered to or given them names at all, because, like, what do they need me to name them for? They probably already have names. It's like, that's just ridiculous. I just wanted to know if they had names. But they didn't, instead of saying, yes, they have names and giving me the names, they're like, would you like to name them? It's like, they don't volunteer anything. They don't give you anything. They only take. That's all they do, is they take.
Why do you think they're here?
Well, they're doing a breeding program, obviously. At least it's obvious to me. They're breeding hybrids. And one time I asked them, where do my offspring live? The ones you've shown me, plus the little baby boy. Where do you keep them? And they had me walk over to this wall, not the same wall as the one with the children and with the screen on it, but it was a different wall with a screen in it. And they showed me a map. And it was a map of the 48 contiguous United States and the actual state division lines were drawn in, which surprising because, it's like, well, if you're coming here from another planet, how do you know about, but I think they've been here a long time. So they know about our political and our boundaries and our state divisions and, where countries are divided. I think they know that stuff. I mean, it's not a secret. It's public knowledge. So I saw this map of the United States, and then they zoomed in on Illinois, and I could see Lake Michigan. I could see Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, Missouri, Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana, Michigan. I saw these states surrounding, the Chicago area. And south of Chicago, just below the tip of Lake Michigan and just west of the Indiana border, was the northern ends of 3 subterranean caverns that were absolutely huge. And I was seeing it at a perspective angle of about 30 degrees, the way the map was orientated. And so it looked like they were about a half a mile underground, maybe a third of a mile, I don't know. But if it was more than a half a mile, it would be awfully uncomfortable for human habitation because of the geothermal gradient. It gets hotter the further underground you go. And I had to look that up. I didn't know that at the time. But there were 3 caverns. There were 2 parallel to each other, closer to the surface, and then one in the middle underneath them, between them. And they were tapered at the ends, a little fatter in the middle. They almost looked like bananas. And they were sloped downward at their southern tips and the southern ends. And at the southern end, I would say they were as far south as Peoria, Illinois. So as far north as, say, Joliet, and as far south as, say, Peoria, but not as far south as like Springfield. But still, these things are ginormous. They're just absolutely huge. And I'd say probably the amount of material that had to be removed to construct these things would rival the Panama Canal. I mean, they're just huge. And I just couldn't accept it. And I struggled whether or not I was going to put this in my memoir, seeing this map, because it's the kind of thing you can test. Like if you have $1 million and you do these, but there's nothing in the geological record. I looked this up because I wanted to find out if it was even possible to have caverns like that under eastern Illinois. And apparently it is. The bedrock under eastern Illinois is mostly dolostone, it's limestone that's high in magnesium content, which makes it very strong. So you can dig quarries, caverns, anything you want down there, and they're not going to collapse under their own weight. So you can make very strong, durable caverns under there. Also, geologically, it's a very stable region. There's very few. I mean, you have the New Madrid Fault, right? But that's not very active. And only twice in my life do I remember even minor tremors.
So you're telling me this is near a fault?
No. I'm just saying that the New Madrid Fault is like near Missouri.
All right, so that's pretty far off.
Right. No, so this is a geologically very stable area. Very few earthquakes in Illinois and Indiana in that region. And then, so I asked ChatGPT, I did a 3D illustration of the map as I saw it. It was not, I didn't do it very accurately, but the best I could at the time. And I showed it to ChatGPT and I asked it to do an analysis, a geological analysis of the design of the caverns. And it told me about the type of bedrock, the dolostone. It told me, well, the height would be appropriate for human habitation, the depth of it, because anything deeper than that would probably be too warm to be comfortable without active cooling. And it said the fact that all 3 of the caverns slope down at the southern end is perfect because that's perfect for drainage and also for circulation of air, because heavier gases like CO2 would sink into a deeper area. So, you could have CO2 safely seeping down. So you could have like a water reservoir with a layer of CO2 on it, and it wouldn't go up into the main part of the cavern. And so it was just giving me this whole breakdown of why this is actually a good design. And he said, well, the deeper cavern could have been for utility purposes, machinery or whatever they use to like scrub the air or whatever they're doing. And then I had it look at the geological record. Is there any existing assay that would preclude the possibility of these things being there? And there's not. There's absolutely no geological data that has been done that precludes the possibility of caverns actually being there. So maybe if we look for it, maybe we could actually find it. But it's very difficult with our technology to detect things half a mile down. It's not easy. You can do it, but it would be expensive.
Could you do it from satellite?
Satellite? No, this isn't something you could like detect with LiDAR. They detected columns under one of the pyramids at Giza.
Yeah.
Those are probably architectural to stabilize, because if you're building on sand or bedrock, I don't know if, like when they built the Burj Khalifa, was it Dubai? I mean, they're building on sand. So they sunk pylons down into the sand deeper than the building actually is to provide a stable base to put a heavy building on top of it. And I thought maybe they did that for the pyramid too. I don't know how they have that kind of technology to get down that deep. The SAR radar that they used for under the pyramid, maybe you could detect it with that. Or if you use echolocation or something like that, I don't know, maybe they could, or just drill down into it, do some prospecting. If you could drill down half a mile, maybe you could, hit one of these things. That would
it would be super expensive, though, I think.
Yeah, expensive and risky. Like, what would happen? I don't know. But I told Whitley Strieber, I struggled with the thought of putting that into my memoir about the map because it's just so, because if somebody did the assay and detected nothing at that depth, then, my credibility just goes down the well, right?
Well, no, because the counter to that would be that. Let me step back. If we're talking about, I think what we talked about a little bit offline, like the David Jacobs thesis, right? That they're replacing us, right?
Yeah, which is what I think as well. Before I heard about Jacobs, I thought that.
It would, like, if you were to ascribe negative intentions to whatever these things are, there would be a lot of deception, right? So they could have very easily seeded, like, you don't know what they seeded into your mind is true or not, right? Like you're taking their word for it. So even if they didn't find anything,
I only know what I saw, but
yeah,
I don't remember everything I saw. I just remember moments where I was lucid and awake. And, because my visual memory is very strong. So I just remember what I see.
Yeah. Even if there's something to this replacement theory, I think it's been going on for a very, very long time. Right.
Yeah.
So
I think they stepped up their operations after we started lighting off nuclear bombs in the 40s. The UFO flaps of the 40s and 50s where people were just seeing them all over the country, and flying saucer became a popular term in the 50s after, I think Kevin Arnold or somebody coined that term.
Kenneth Arnold, yep.
Yeah, okay. So, see, another thing I looked up in the last 5 years since this stuff has been happening, I just dived into ufology, but I looked at the size of those caverns that they showed me under eastern Illinois. You could fit tens of thousands of individuals under there fairly comfortably. And why? Because they're going to live here. If they were breeding hybrids to take back home to Zeta Reticuli or wherever they're living, they wouldn't even need to do the breeding here. They could just take our genes, put it in a little test tube, and take it back home and do their shit, right? But they're breeding them here. They're keeping them here, underground. Why? I think they're meant to live here on Earth, not underground, on the surface. Because humans, physically, we can live on the surface. We can handle a limited amount of direct sunlight and, no problem. And the tall grays, they can't handle direct sunlight at all. And I think they may even find our atmosphere uncomfortable. I can exist in their space, in their ship or whatever rooms they had me in. I can be in there, but I think they made it comfortable for themselves, but I don't think they can live here in the surface world with us. So I think what they're doing is, one, I think they've lost the ability to reproduce sexually, which is why they're doing breeding with us. And based on some things other people have said, including Bob Lazar, I looked into this guy, Bob Lazar. I think he's absolutely the real deal. And he said he's read briefings in his early days at Area S4. And one of the things he's read was that the Greys consider humans to be containers. And I think Bob believes that refers to humans as containers of souls. We are souls within these bodies. That makes us, fully alive sentient beings. Whereas the Greys have been cloning themselves. Maybe their planet is not very hospitable as it once was. And maybe, from solar radiation, maybe they lost their magnetic field or something, but they had to clone themselves because they lost the ability to procreate sexually. I'm just guessing. A lot of speculation here.
Yeah, or they could just be biological constructs to contain some other species of soul, right?
Well, I think that the little ones, the skinny bobs, I think they're biological robots like worker bees. And they're designed to be able to work within our environments. They're the emissaries. They're the ones that come to do collections, to take us in and out of our homes or to collect their semen and ova from us. But the tall grays, I think now, again, speculation. I think they're looking to maybe breed themselves back into the ability to host souls, because souls can eventually ascend to some kind of completion. Like, I believe that the whole universe itself is a nursery for creating and fostering intelligent life. Mm-hmm. And so there are countless trillions, quadrillions of stars and countless billions and trillions of planets. And a large percentage of them may be enough like Earth that, to host life that can become complex life that could become intelligent complex life. And I think intelligent life is common. You have to look for it, but it's out there. And so I think the universe is a culture medium for intelligent life. And I think that the way to graduate from that culture medium is our souls eventually become mature enough that we leave this frame of reference to whoever created the universe. Maybe it's a mathematical simulation. Who knows? I don't know. But we can leave this frame of reference as our souls. And I think they want to be able to do that someday. And so maybe they want to join with us. They want to become us. But they don't like our culture. We're violent. We're stupid. We're self-destructive. And we harm our own environment. And I just think that maybe they think they can do a better job here. And
yeah, it might be this is a thought I had this morning, actually.
Okay.
Is that maybe the consciousnesses, the souls, or whatever, that inhabit us are actually more advanced than these beings that are visiting us, because the mode is more difficult. We're in a more difficult game down here than they are up there, or wherever they are, whether it's cross-dimensional or whatever.
I don't believe in extraspatial dimensions. I think they just have technology that allows them to phase matter through matter. So when they disappear through a wall, they're not going to some wonky fifth or sixth dimension. I think they're just phasing matter through matter. And
just vibrating at a lower frequency or something like that. So it just,
well, they can control
maybe higher frequency.
Yeah. With electrogravitics, they can control mass. And so like when I saw the 4 grays leave my bedroom in 1994, they zipped through my bedroom door like it wasn't even there. And so I think, now they didn't walk, they didn't run. It was like they were propelled out of my room. So I think they have the technology to levitate and propel themselves. They don't really have to do much walking at all. It's kind of like these kids today with those little scooters that they're always riding around. I never see kids walking anymore. But I think these little grays, they just kind of zip around with whatever technology they're using. And that same technology can allow them to move through walls.
Have you ever had any discussions with the Greys on any of this stuff about the nature of reality and
that I remember? No, I do remember a one-sided discussion where a tall gray was walking beside me. We were next to a wall. I thought we were outside, but he said, "You have to get rid of your nuclear weapons." And I said, "But we'd be giving up our mutual deterrent." It's like I was arguing with him, and I'm thinking later on when I was back at home and woke up, and I'm like, why would I say something like that? I hate nuclear weapons. Why am I arguing with? He's like, you have to get rid of nuclear weapons. Like, yeah, we do. Why didn't I agree with him? I don't understand why I didn't agree with him.
Because it's a deterrent for them too.
Yeah, I guess so.
If they try to do what you're trying to do, it's the ultimate poison pill. All right. If we can't have it, nobody can.
Yeah. Yeah. I think they genuinely fear it, but they seem to be preoccupied with our nuclear technology because they've been witnessed by silo personnel deactivating or activating the timing devices on these Minuteman missiles. And then they've been seen interfering with nuclear reactors. They have the ability to just play with our toys like they know our toys better than we do. They could just activate and deactivate things remotely. And that's just scary advanced technology. I don't even know how they do it.
How long do you think they've been here?
Well, I mean, if you believe in the ancient alien theory, which I now am a full-on believer, I think they've been here tens of thousands of years, maybe more. Let's say they became an intelligent species a few million years before us, which in geological time is nothing. Mm-hmm. If they were intelligent species during the time of the dinosaurs and knew how to survive all this time, their technology would have been akin to magic. And we would see them as gods. And I think that's exactly what's happened. I've lost my religious beliefs. I still believe in like a supreme being, like something created the universe. And that's about as far as it goes. I don't try to have any answers beyond that. But I believe now that the Bible is a chronicle of extraterrestrial interventions in human affairs. And the reason why I say that so confidently in my own belief is that ever since I learned that Abraham, the father of the three main religions, he was from the Sumerian city of Ur. Mm-hmm. And the Sumerians, they had the creation story where the Anunnaki said, let's make man in our own image. They had the flood story. And so Abraham just took the Anunnaki and kind of amalgamated them into a single God when he went west to start Judaism, the nation of Israel. So I see everything in a completely different context now. Like the Exodus out of Egypt, when the Jews were the chosen people, I think they were a genetic breeding pool that they wanted to keep homogenous. That's what I believe. I believe that the Greys or the Anunnaki wanted to take them out of Egypt because it was a cultural melting pot at the time. And they were in danger of interbreeding too much with other races. And I think they wanted to keep them somewhat racially homogenous. So they moved them out of Egypt. So I think that wasn't God at all. That's what I think. And I think the nation of Israel, the people, they were chosen not because they were any better than anybody else. They just had sequence of genes that these extraterrestrials found useful for breeding. And I have a branch of my family that goes into that. I have a descendancy from the House of David in my lineage, among others. But, I don't know if that's why they bother me, but they took my mother before me. And so
How did you find that out? How did you learn about that?
Well, when I started telling my mother about my experiences, and I told her about these screen memories I was having, and I even told her about Whitley Strieber, about his screen memory, where he remembered seeing a barn owl in the window of his kitchen, and then asked his wife, Ann, did you see this barn owl? And she didn't see it. But later on, when he went under hypnosis, that barn owl in his memory was replaced by the face of a gray alien. And that was in his book Communion, which I read in 1988, not because I thought I had anything to do with any of this, but because when I saw the gray on the front cover, it stirred something inside me. Like, it seemed emotionally familiar. On an emotional level, it was familiar. So I bought the book and I read it. But I didn't have my first memory of seeing a gray until 1994, which was 6 years later. But my experiences started in 1970. But then when I told my mother about my experiences and the screen memories, it jogged a memory of hers. It goes back to 1953 in Turtle Creek, Pennsylvania, where she grew up. They lived on the top of a hill called Rose Hill on Clugston Avenue, and there's this very old house on top of there. And there used to be coal mines running through that hill, and all of the homes on top of the hill had an entrance into a shaft of the coal mine where they could dig their own coal to heat the house. And it was kind of a sweet setup at that time. But by the time they moved into that house with my mother, when she was young, that mine entrance had been bricked up, and their cellar was just a kind of a dirty pit, and there was like a laundry machine down there, and not an environment for a little girl, but I'll get to that. But anyway, in 1953, two of her older brothers saw a UFO flying above the valley, that they were looking over the valley over a vast train yard from Clugston Avenue. And so they saw this UFO, and it was spinning, it had lights, and then it took off. But it was like right by their house. And so they ran inside. This was 1953. They ran inside and told my mom and told their mom, Gertrude, my grandmother, about it. So everybody ran outside to look up, and they couldn't find it. It had already gone. But that night, my mother, as she was laying in bed in the middle of the night, she was the only child in the house. They're poor, so most of the siblings shared a room, but she was the youngest. So she had her own bedroom because she was a girl. And in the middle of the night, she woke up and she felt compelled to go into the basement. Like she has to go check on something. I have to check on something. Something, it's important I go down there. She didn't understand why. So she got up out of bed. She walked downstairs, snuck past her parents' bedroom, through the living room, into the kitchen, the dining room, then into the kitchen, and then opened the cellar door and started walking down the cellar. About 4 steps down, she froze. She couldn't move. And there was just enough light from the kitchen going down the stairs to illuminate just the base of the stairs and no further. Beyond that was shadowed black. And there was something stirring in the darkness at the base of the stairs. And then she saw it. 2 large German shepherds. Now, they didn't own any German shepherds. They had a small dog named Fuzzy, about this big. But 2 large German shepherds started coming up the stairs at her, and she was frozen. She was wearing her little, nightgown pajamas, and she couldn't move. And they were growling and snarling and barking at her. Frightened the shit out of her, but she couldn't move. And then she went unconscious when they lunged at her. And sometime later, she woke up. She was back in her room, back in her bed. So either they returned her or they had her walk herself back to bed. We don't know. But she dismissed it as a dream at the time, which is a normal thing to do. Okay, I had a nightmare about walking downstairs. And if that was the end of it, it would have been dismissed that way. But there was a UFO that night above their house. And then in the 1970s, between 1970 and 1974, between the ages of 1 and 5, when I was very small, I had these orbs of plasma, like this white light plasma coming through my closet door. Sometimes it would be the wall, sometimes it would be the ceiling, and it would cross the room. And when it reached my forehead, I would go unconscious. And I remember being a baby. I remember being a year old or maybe 15, 16 months old in my bedroom in 1970. And I remember standing up in my crib, holding onto the side rail, I remember the pajamas I wore were buttoned up, all the way down the leg, right? But nowadays they have zippers, right? I remember the crinkly plastic feeling on the bottom of my soles and standing on the mattress. And I remember the whole layout of the room. And for some reason, I was standing up in my crib, and I remember seeing this orb of white light plasma just coming right through the door, came to my forehead, reached my forehead. I went unconscious. And this happened many times in different rooms of the house. Like if I was sleeping upstairs, it happened up there. And this happened for 4 years. Well, in 1974, my mother started having recurring nightmares about her, my father, and me being chased through the neighborhood by hundreds of white orbs descending out of the sky and chasing us. And we were trying to make it home. So we were sneaking through the backyards, hiding behind trees. And every time we'd move, the things were closer to us. And then they'd catch up to us. And my mother there'd like a bright shining beam would come down on her. This is a dream, by the way, but she had the same dream over and over. The bright light would illuminate her. And then my dad said to her, "Don't worry, honey, they're just trying to make you into an angel." And then the light would go away, and her and my dad are still there, but I'm gone. I disappeared. And every time she had the dream, I disappeared. I was being taken by these white orbs that were chasing us. She's having these dreams at the same period of time that I'm seeing white orbs come into my bedroom, which tells me that she's suppressing memories, that her subconscious mind is trying to talk to like, hey, you have memories about this stuff happening. So it's having dreams about these things. So she must have been seeing these things and then suppressing the memory. And she must have been knowing that I was being taken as a baby. Her baby boy is being taken, and she's suppressing this memory. And she forgot all about it all these years later until I brought it up. And then she told me about the 1953 incident. She told me about her dreams in the 70s. When I was seeing these things while I'm awake, she was dreaming about them. So that's how I know they were taking her too. And probably they were still taking her in the 70s because she was still like genetically viable, woman who could have babies at that time. And then I noticed, and I put this in my memoir, they seem to have a schedule, Sean. They seem to come every 20-ish years for a 4-year period on a monthly basis. That seems to be their schedule with my family. Because they came for her in 1953, so in the early to mid 50s, early to mid 70s. And then in 1994, they came for me again. And I think they may have come for me in 1995. There may have been a 4-year period, but I wasn't privy to all those encounters. I only remember 1 or 2. So, and then again in the 2020s. So they waited a little more than 20 years when they came back for me. It was more like 26 years, or maybe it was 24 years. I don't know, but it seems that they have a schedule. So 20-year gap, 4-year rotation on a monthly basis. And I told that to Wesley Strieber, and he said that kind of rings true because it seemed like he had a schedule with them as well, but he can't articulate it, as closely as I've done.
Why now? Look, do you think they're on a heightened schedule, or do you think, in terms of kind of what their motives are?
Well, I think maybe being a man in his 50s, I think maybe they came for me recently because I'm nearing the end of my usefulness to them. I imagine maybe even in just a couple of years, in my 60s or 70s, my sperm count might be too low or just not the quality of motility, who knows? I'm just worried that they might be bothering my daughter, and I hope not. I pray to God they don't. I just hope they're leaving her alone. I mean, she's nonverbal, autistic, low functioning. They should respect that and just leave her the F alone.
You're aware of the telepathy tapes, right?
The telepathy tapes?
Oh, you should. So there's a podcast called The Telepathy Tapes, and it's about nonverbal autistic children who are highly telepathic.
She might
And
be.
they were running these experiments, and they were able to effectively read. In fact, I think Whitley said that they have a place called the Hill or something like that where they meet telepathically, all these children. And the reason they know that is there are people in like different states who would report that their daughter or their son was talking about somebody specific name in a certain state, and it would be true that they didn't or communicate. But apparently Whitley claims he's gone to this place, and they were very polite, but they're like, thank you very much, but this place is not for you.
Okay. I'm not familiar with that, no. But I've always wanted communication with my daughter. I went so far as to create an iPad program to help her communicate, but she didn't use it very well.
I once had a very lucid dream where my daughter was communicating with me as if she were a normal child. It was bizarre.
Yeah. I've had dreams about her talking. And they were emotional dreams. Normally, I don't feel emotions in dreams or physical sensations, but with my daughter, I've had a few very emotional dreams where she would speak and I would just be overcome with joy.
Yeah, look, it could be your subconscious, but it might not be. It might not be an accident. So
I can't speak on things that I don't really know, but I try to talk about what I've seen, what I've experienced. And I'm willing to do some speculation, like, speculating on religious stuff and maybe on what their agenda might be. But then there's people like David Jacobs, who's probably more qualified to talk about this stuff. Now, we were talking about my speculation about, us being replaced. This was before I even knew about him. When I started speculating on that as an idea and I started writing my memoir, I asked ChatGPT, hey, have other authors talked about this particular theory? And then I got Jacobs, I got Nigel Connor, Bud Hopkins, John Mack, and, all talking about similar things. And so I use ChatGPT to help me with research. So in my memoir, I don't just talk about my experiences. I talk about other authors' work and sometimes their experiences where they either had an experience or they worked with people who've had experiences. And so I talk about the broader phenomenon of these encounters as they've happened with other people. So every time I talk about an aspect of my own encounters, I talk about that same aspect on a broader perspective within my book. So people can, it's almost like an abduction 101, my memoir a little bit. I hope people like it.
How pervasive do you think this is?
Oh, I think it's global. And I don't know if they have a particular demographic that they prefer. Like I mentioned, the nation of Israel, I think that whole thing started because they were interested in them for breeding. But I don't know if they're confined to a particular subtype of Homo sapiens. I don't know. I mean, I can only speculate. And Whitley Strieber doesn't even believe that it necessarily has anything to do with Rh negative factor blood or blue eyes or green eyes or Caucasian or dark skin. He says he doesn't think there's no definitive answer on whether that matters. And so I'm just trying to be open-minded about the whole thing. Yeah, I've got ideas, I've got suspicions, but I really don't have any answers. I can only talk about what I've been through. And it's kind of shocking and surprising how much I remember without the need for hypnosis. And, I could talk for hours more than you and I have time for on last program and on this program. But hopefully, if after the book comes out, if you read it and decide you want to talk about some other things we haven't addressed, I'm happy to come back and talk about those things.
100%. And then when we discussed this in the last episode, but when does your interview on the History Channel air?
I was told it's scheduled for June 27th, but the nature of these things, I thought it was originally going to air in late April because they recorded it in late January, but they were so enthusiastic about my story after they recorded it. They do most of their interviews in really nice rented homes in the Los Angeles area. And so that's where we filmed, just in a normal neighborhood. in a really nice house. And some of the other producers were off camera in another room looking at monitors, watching my interview. And so I was talking with the producer who interviewed me. I didn't meet any of the cast members. I would love to meet some of the cast members. Like David Childress. I love that.
That's a pretty good impression.
Yeah. Some kind of extraterrestrial. I love that guy. And Giorgio and all those guys. And especially Linda Howe. I adore her. I've spoken to her for 4 hours on 2 different phone calls. And because she was the first one I approached with my story, and she was interested in my story. But as I understand it, both Linda Howe and Whitley Strieber were interviewed at that same house the very next day after I left. And so Gabe Rotello, the producer that interviewed me, told Whitley Strieber all about my story. And then Whitley Strieber's like, oh, I want to talk to Erik. Can you hook me up? And that's how I was introduced to Whitley. And for me, it's like, I read Strieber's work 30 some years ago. And so it was a thrill for me. I didn't even know I was an abductee when I first read his book. But when I saw that gray on the cover, this gray, I had to buy the book. It was a paperback at the time. This one's hardcover, but the one I bought was a paperback.
Yeah, that's the re-release, right?
Yeah. But it was $5.02. And it was on an end cap at a Jewel Osco on Northwest Highway in Des Plaines. And, kind of a strange place to have a book like that, but that's where I got it. And I read it. And then when Transformation came out and Breakthrough came out, I read those books. For some reason, I just had this need to understand it. And I didn't know I was connected to it yet. And then in 1994, I had an experience in my bedroom. But even then, I didn't think I was an abductee. I thought that was a one-off incident. I'm like, all right, that wasn't real. It couldn't have been real. That was too bizarre. But then when things started happening in 2020, and I did that experiment, and then it started happening on a regular basis, like, well, now I know 1994 was real. And then I still hadn't connected it yet to the orbs in my bedroom in childhood. I hadn't connected it to that yet. It wasn't until I was watching a documentary, I think it was an episode of Ancient Aliens, where they had one of those alien cons where like all those people were like Linda Howe and the others were like on a stage talking to an audience and, raise your hand if you've ever seen this or that. And then somebody was talking about seeing white orbs coming into the room. And I'm like, oh man, this goes back to my childhood. And then when I started talking to my mom, and I realized now it goes back to 1953 at least. And so they're after my mother's line, and it's possible they've bothered other members of my family, but I've talked to everybody and nobody has any memories. Yeah.
Any final words for the audience?
Well, if you go to bed at night and you wake up and something's different in your room, just be observant. Pay attention to patterns. Maybe you'll become aware of something that affects your life that you didn't know about, because that's how it happened for me. And talk about it. I reported my case to MUFON. Like, I didn't know that my case would be this unusual. I didn't know that they would be so excited about it. I thought maybe anybody who's had this experience remembers this many encounters as I do. And that's not the case. Most people remember 1 or 2 things. They'll have a flash of a memory, but I have sustained memories over a 4-year period, earlier this decade, and then a couple of things going back in previous decades. But between 2020 and 2024, my life was turned upside down. And I started talking about it with everybody I could. And then I got used to talking about it. But yours is only the second podcast I've done.
Are they still visiting you?
No. I stopped remembering encounters like March of 24. So last year. And yeah, so it's been quiet. Nothing. I think.
And how old were you at the last visit?
55. I'm 56 now. So yeah. But I think they took what they want. I think they've done what they need to. Will they be back? I don't know. Why would they visit an old man? You know,
it depends, right? It could be a longitudinal study. It might not just be reproductive agenda, right? Could be.
no, I don't know. But when I was with that doctor person being in that large room, and we were being observed by more than a dozen very tall grays, 7, 8 feet tall. And when he had his hands on me, and I guess he was healing my GI system, my GI tract, they were all chattering among each other. I didn't talk about that when I first mentioned it. They were all talking, telepathically, and I could hear them. I couldn't understand a word they were saying. I don't think they were intending to communicate with me, but I could hear the chatter, and I was being annoyed because I was trying to talk to this doctor about how this other mean doctor had his hands on my balls. And so I was getting upset with them, like, hey, I want to tell them shut up. So I went like this, like, quiet down, and they all shut up at the same time. And they were looking at me. They all shut up at the exact same time. Then they turned their backs on me and walked closer to the back wall, deeper in the shadow where beyond where they were illuminated. I couldn't see them anymore. I could see they were still there, but they were just like dark silhouettes. And then they turned back around to look at me again. So they thought maybe I couldn't see them. I don't know, but I haven't figured out why all of those tall grays would have stopped their duties to come observe me interacting with this doctor thing. Why were they all there gawking? What was that about? And I talked about it in my memoir, but I still don't know. I was only speculating, like maybe they had a personal interest, a personal stake in my health. I don't know. Or maybe I was an unusual case and they all wanted to find out why I was unusual. I don't know. But I'm still scratching my head over that encounter.
All right, Eric. It was an absolute pleasure, and I really enjoyed hearing your story.
Well, thanks, Sean. It was nice to be here. Thank you.
If you enjoyed today's video, please hit like and subscribe, and also hit the notification button so you can be notified whenever I post new content. Thank you. Now, if you're enjoying the channel and you want to support it, there are several things you can do. In fact, there are 5 things you can do. The first thing you can do is just buy my books. I got plenty of books out in the market right now, and I would prefer that folks buy a book rather than giving me direct support because they get something out of it. They get a real tangible product. The second way you can support me is by becoming a member on YouTube or becoming a patron on Patreon. And just go to either site and it'll explain everything. The third way you can support the channel is by checking out my merch site, which is here. There's plenty of stuff that you can get to support the channel. And I'd appreciate that you have it and you can wear it. Not only do you help support the channel, but you also help promote the channel, and I appreciate that. The fourth way that you can support the channel, and this is really easy, is anytime you want to buy something on Amazon, literally just go to the description below and click on any link, literally any link. The channel gets a cut of that, and it costs you no extra money. You just go through the link, as I'm part of the Amazon Affiliates Club. The fifth and final way you can support the channel is through donations. Now, I don't prefer these because it's more of an expression of gratitude, but you don't really get anything out of it as a subscriber to the channel. However, if you decide to do these options, there's 2 options. There's Buy Me a Coffee, which is a separate site, and there's also, you can go through YouTube with either a super chat, super sticker, or a super thanks. Again, I prefer Buy Me a Coffee because that organization takes less money than Amazon does. But either way, I appreciate any support you are willing to give the channel. So thank you very much and keep watching. I really appreciate it.